I certainly get a kick out of bringing along a Mo instead of my space cat to a mission, but that's only just for shits and giggles. I don't necessarily hate robotic partners, it's just hard to compete with a cat that can provide an S-load of random yet useful buffs. If you ask me, Mo's fall short as companions not because they don't have useful mechanics, but because the reliance on their AI can be awkward. The same thing can be said for Kubrals, to a smaller extent. Part of the reason why this Meta Cavat in particular is so good isn't just because the buffs are great, but because charm doesn't really require supervision from the player. Because this Meta Cavat's signature charm ability applies no matter how far away the player is, you can play without worrying about potentially not making use of a far-away used companion ability, such as a Mo's Whiplash Mine. This is something that could likely be fixed by changing companions entirely, making it so the player can command a companion when they want an ability to be used, rather than having to wait on the computer to pop it randomly. Cooldowns would still apply of course, the only difference would be that companion abilities would be activated upon the player's choosing, not an AI's. This would be possible for PC players, because we have plenty of available keys to use thanks to the keyboard. For example, by default DE could make it so pressing the 6 key activates one companion ability, and pressing the Y key activates the other. Besides changing the programming to make these abilities be player-activated instead of computer-activated, all that we really would need is UI elements that say when companion powers are on cooldown and when they're available for use. Again, this is just for PC. For consoles, this would be impossible. Unfortunately, controllers don't have the luxury of having multiple buttons to choose from, so the controls for console players are already fairly limited, even more so on Warframes with multiple powers such as Avara or Equinox. Suddenly making it so players are able to activate a stasis field whenever they need one would mean more mandatory key bindings, which on PC wouldn't be an issue, but for console players, not so much. Alternatively, you could also change Mo abilities so they're more player-focused instead of companion-focused. For instance, Stasis Field could instead be generated around the player instead of the Mo. Security Override could instead apply on the next time the player hacks anything instead of the Mo. You get the idea. If none of those two work, you could always just say,
"Fuck it!"
and give players the ability to take two companions to missions, one being organic, such as a Cavat or Kubrow, and one being robotic, such as a Sentinel or Mo. Although changing abilities would be less of a hassle for DE, this would still leave Kubrows in the dust, which is a separate problem with separate abilities. Of course, we still haven't talked about the companion mechanics that are health and stasis. If you ask me, stasis is just an outdated feature that should be removed. Back when the game had only Sentinels and 4 Kubrows to choose from as companions, this might have made sense, but, now that we're up to 5 Kubrows, the Helminth Charger, 2 Cavats, and 3 Moths, being slowed down just to switch between companions feels unnecessary. Robotic companions don't suffer from this, so to tack this onto just organic pets feels unneeded. Then we have the genetic decay from health. I know that maintaining a Kubrow with credits isn't as expensive as it used to be, but that doesn't mean that it's fine as is. While this mechanic sort of makes sense because Kubrows and Cavats are organic companions, having to constantly expend resources to keep them in tip-top shape also seems rather pointless, because by that logic, we should also be spending resources to repair robotic companions every time they get destroyed or get down. If you want to take it to the extreme, then we should also be spending resources to repair weapons and warframes every time they get taken to missions. Of course, this isn't something people are asking for, because not only would it be an unnecessary expenditure of resources, but because the current system of equip whatever you want without having to worry about damage works just fine. Basically, companions are in a relatively average spot at the moment, mainly Mo's and Kubrows. Updating or reworking them to bring them up to par with Sentinels or Cavats would do wonders. Thank you for watching.